Hello, everyone, and welcome to NAPHN 20's Owners Roundtable. This is a discussion with owners, developers, and city leaders and planners for owners, developers, city leaders, and planners on all things Passive House. And this is our second session. It comes on the heels of our first session, which convened a group of panelists to talk about the process of choosing to do Passive House. So they walked around the pool and tried to figure out when they were going to jump in. Well, we pick up where they left off. And we're now in the pool. And we've convened a group of panelists to talk to you about the process of going through design, construction, and commissioning on a Passive House project. I'm Beth Eckenrode, and I'm with the OROS Group. And I'll be facilitating today's discussion. And I'm so excited to introduce you to such an esteemed group of panelists that we have for you today. And I'll start with Alex Bernstein. And Alex is with Bernstein Real Estate, and Alex is going to tell us about a project called Flow Chelsea. And Flow Chelsea's in the heart of Manhattan, and it's a mixed-use, mixed-income rental building. So welcome, Alex. And then we have Ed Kolic. And Ed is the founder of 8th Avenue Development Group based in Vancouver. And Ed's done some projects we'll hear about today, but most interestingly is the Heights, an 85-unit, 6-story, mixed-use residential rental apartment. It's the largest mixed-use Passive House development in Canada. And it was part of setting the stage in Vancouver for the city's green building policies and the Passive House growth in that area of Canada. So welcome, Ed.
Hello.
And Emma Osmundsen. Emma is Managing Director of Exeter City Living Limited, which is a profit-for-purpose development company of Exeter City Council. Emma's been developing certified Passive House projects for 12 years, many of them UK's firsts. The first multi-residential Passive House development, the first extra care older persons Passive House village, and the first Passive House leisure center. So happy to have you with us, Emma.
Thank you, Beth.
Then we have Grant Ervin, and Grant is the Chief Resilience Officer of the City of Pittsburgh in Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania. And Grant oversees the integration of sustainability and resilience into city's policies. Pittsburgh's in the process of enacting legislation to ensure all city buildings are zero energy ready. And in fact, Fire Station 8 is the first city building to use the EnerFit strategy to employ a Passive House approach to becoming zero energy ready. Welcome, Grant.
Great to be here, Beth.
And Garrett Scott. Garrett is dealer-operator of Scott Subaru, a Canadian-based automotive retailer, and they just recently completed their first Passive House automotive dealership. Really excited to hear Garrett talk about how a commercial retail outlet thinks about the benefits of Passive House. So welcome and thanks for joining us, Garrett.
Thanks for having me.
So we have a lot of firsts. We have a lot of pioneers in this group. I said first and largest, and so many times it was amazing. And so I'd love to jump in and get started on our first question. You all are now in the pool. So we use the pool analogy a lot in our first session, in our first Owners Roundtable, and now you're in the pool. And so the first thing people ask about in terms of Passive House projects is, how do I build my team? What do I think about when it comes to team building? And I'd love to start with Alex. Alex, how do you think about team building on a Passive House project? And is it different than how you think about it in a more traditional project?
Great question, Beth. Thank you. So this was our first Passive House, Flow Chelsea, and we knew that we wanted to do an energy efficient type building. And our first hire was our architect. Stosh at ZH Architects had built several Passive Houses previously. And so bringing him on board, he was able to really target the GCs and the other players, the MEP, our structural engineer, our oversight guys. They all had Passive House experience, which I think was the most important aspect of the project, was really getting people that had that experience. They knew, they've gone through problems and issues and knew, how to solve them. And so really, that was the greatest thing in building the team, was to get people with experience. I've actually spoken to 2 or 3 other New York City developers that had started passive house projects and stopped them because they used their traditional architects and their GCs that had no experience, and it just started with cost overruns and issues. So really, I think that was the first and most important thing. I mentioned oversight, and we hired a gentleman by the name of Kevin Brennan, and Kevin was really paramount to testing and the oversight, specifically of the electricians and the plumbers, and they suggested doing a mock-up. So that's something for the next question. But we're really happy with we really ran into no problems because of the experience that the team had.
Well, thank you, Alex. Ed, do you have something to add to the conversation on teams?
In our case, there was no experience in Vancouver. There was a lot of single-family homes, but nobody had done a multifamily project. So the key in our case was to find an architect. In this case, was Scott Kennedy from Cornerstone, who actually started the Passive House Association in Canada after the fact. So somebody that's engineering driven, I guess open ideas, and I'm going to call them passionate. So both our builder and the architect were key to creating those teams. Both hadn't done a project of this scale or even a passive house before. So it's just applying logic and solving your problems as you go through. Right. So that's the team. The team is absolutely critical.
Great. Thank you. Emma, how did you approach, you've done so many projects. Did you take different approaches based on the project, or how do you think about team building today with all your experience?
Helps if you like them.
That's always helpful.
No, I would say we're really fortunate. We've been developing passive house buildings now for 12 years. So we've got a good kind of network of consultants and professionals that are not just qualified but also experienced with passive house. But when we started our journey 12 years ago, there were virtually no certified passive house designers in the UK. So we started with a German architect, and he was embedded within a firm close to us in the city centre. And he really held our hands on our first journey. But what we've come to realise is that getting the right team is absolute paramount, but not just from a design perspective. Having the right project management team, again, ideally with passive house experience, and cost consultants, because often it's the quantity surveyor or the cost consultancy team that kill passive house projects, because often they don't have good enough experience and understanding of how to cost these great projects. So I think it pays to shop around, to really interview and interrogate potential team members. Go and visit some of the projects that they've delivered elsewhere for other projects. Perhaps go and meet some of the residents that have moved into their buildings. And that can do a lot to really help build your own confidence, and also be very open about sharing lessons learnt. When we started 12 years ago, we were very inexperienced, and we're still learning on each and every project. So what we like to do is take people on the journey with us and use them on repeat projects. But increasingly now, with our portfolio growing bigger and bigger, we are reaching out to other designers and consultants who perhaps have got no passive house experience, but we're able, from a client's perspective, to disseminate and share our learning with them.
Let me ask you this. When you come up to a point in a project where you've got a team member that isn't really necessarily doing what you want, how do you know when to invest in that team member to build them and to get them that experience versus saying it's probably just not a good fit? How do you know when to act on a team member?
I think a lot of it is quite instinctive, and I think this is where female clients might have a little bit of an advantage, perhaps. But I think a lot of it is down to attitude. And even if you have not got any passive house experience or been involved with passive house projects, passive house it's almost a culture in itself, and it attracts a certain attitude. And you're really looking for people that are committed to quality and really understand what the client is seeking to achieve. So I think very early on you can attain someone's attitude, probably more so than their professional competence. And I think it's the attitude more than anything that we really look for.
That's great. Thank you. Grant, do you have anything to add to the conversation on teams?
Yeah, one of the things that we've taken a lot of attention to is starting to build our own internal capacity with regards to Passive House. So in our efforts to kind of strive for energy performance, we've partnered closely with our Department of Public Works and specifically our architects and project managers to provide them with Passive House training and energy efficiency training and technical tools. So it's typically kind of not their kind of role to go out and find those resources on a full-time basis. So we've basically been able to shepherd a host of local, national, and international experts to bring into house and to work closely with our public works team to basically integrate kind of the, to play a little bit off Emma's remarks, the ethos of Passive House. There is a kind of a group or a network of Passive House providers out there, which is a fun bunch. Definitely make that clear. But exposing people to the technical tools as well as that ethos is helping us to start to drive performance.
That's great. Thank you. And Garrett, I want to make sure we get you in on this conversation.
Well, I don't have the developer side of the story today, but putting our team together was definitely challenging. We didn't have the expertise necessarily in Red Deer. Now, fortunately, Passive Canada was able to provide us with certain courses that our tradespeople could go take, and a few other, I guess, helpful guides that would ensure that we could execute the building to the requirements needed. But we really reached far and wide. I mean, Red Deer is in Alberta, which is right between Calgary and Edmonton, are the two major cities. Our lead architect came from the Vancouver area. Our passive certifiers came from the Toronto area. Our general contractor came locally, but our equipment, it was sourced all over the place. So it was a little more challenging. But in the end, I mean, we still reached the same goal everybody else did. And I think if I was to do this again now, we'd be able to capitalize on a lot of these learnings and bring the cost structures down so that it makes even more sense. So that's my two bits about it.
That's great. Thank you. Let's go on to our next question. I want to start with Ed on this question. So, Ed, what was your greatest fear and fears that you might have anticipated, but even the ones you didn't anticipate as you went into your first Passive House project?
Fears. So you're saying jump into the deep end of the pool.
Jump into the deep end. You didn't go to the shallow end. You didn't walk your way in. You jumped right into the deep end.
Oh, that's right. That's right. Once you're in, you're in. Fears, I guess, primarily is at that point in time, as I said just a little bit earlier, there were no buildings, multifamily buildings built in Vancouver at that time. So it was, what is it? How do you approach it? How do you ensure, that it's built correctly? We did some research, right? So how do you address your fears? So one is you gather your people around the table. So in our case was Cornerstone Architecture. They sort of edged us along. I'd been working with Scott for a number of years on other projects. I was quite taken by one of the projects. We did a simple thing. I put sunshades on the outside of a building, and he used this term as what's a passive method of keeping your building cool. So that word sort of struck with me, and it was just a simple thing to do. And then he evolved it into, well, let's do this Passive House building. And what I liked about it was the simplicity of the building. So it wasn't a high-tech building. It's not driven by smart systems. It's just a simple building. And for me, it went back. Our family comes from Croatia, so I go back. And you see these old farming houses, which is like in Greece, thick rock walls, and it's as simple as that, right? Keeps the heat in, or keeps the heat out, right? Wintertime keeps the heat in, keeps the heat out. So that's how I looked at it. but back to fear. So there were no pre-existing examples. So we did some research, and there was a building being built in Portland. A nonprofit was building a 60-unit multifamily. Went down there. It was midway through construction. They had they had their air systems in place. Envelope was still being put on. So we learned a lot from that. Spoke to a number of projects that were going on in the U.S. as well. At that time, I think it's Columbia University had their student housing tower being built. Spoke to them, just learned as much as we could, right? And trying to understand the differences. Back to how do you address your fears? Again, get your good people around the table, and Emma alluded to this. It's attitude of the people, right? So we look for design professionals that either had, and contractors and engineers and architects that had the attitude open to figuring things out, right? The other thing that we did, so when we started to build, we said, okay, if we're putting out to tender our sub-trades, nobody knows how to do this. Nobody knows how to approach it. So they're either going to overbid, they will overcompensate for what the lack of knowledge is, or they may underbid and then create problems for us. Either way, either overbid or underbid, creating problems for us. So what we did is we actually we put our own crews together. So in particular, we wanted to have all the sub-trades work in the same manner they've always done. So the biggest issue around the passive house has been the envelope, right, and the air tightness. So we had our own crew that managed that whole process and actually executed that process that we could control. And a superintendent of air tightness, basically, that's what we did. So we broke it down into parts, the most important being that air tightness from our point of view. We controlled that process ourselves, and when I say we, it's the builder, who is actually our partner in the building, and we still own that building today, and it runs as a rental apartment here in Vancouver. There was also mention of we built a wall assembly, right? So we built some mock-ups of a wall assembly, just how every corner works, how the windows sit in, how do you seal all of them, and that model was it was 8 foot tall, and built it out and had everybody roll through the project that came, and they studied that mock-up, and everybody knew going into what the objective was, and back to the attitude. Okay, anyway, that's how we addressed our fear.
That's outstanding. Emma, I know you have to think back to fears because you probably don't have so many today, but when you all first started, how did you attack it, and what were your fears?
Oh, I always have fears for every one of our projects. I think that's healthy, really. Our first Passive House project, I was so fearful that I didn't tell anybody that it was going to be a certified Passive House building. And sometimes that can help, particularly working in local government, because normally if I asked to build a Passive House building, I probably would have been told no, so I didn't tell anyone. So I was pretty fearful that the concept wouldn't work. But believe me, once we finished our first development was very modest. It was 3 flats. It became certified, and for the last 12 years, we haven't looked back. I cannot imagine building anything that isn't a certified Passive House building. It would just be balmy. So yes, you have your fear on your first project. I think now with a fantastic Passive House community, a lot of that fear can be de-risked. And once you've got your first one under your belt, then it's onwards and upwards.
Yeah, that's great. Thank you very much. Grant.
Yeah, I think it goes back again to kind of like the training. Like you have to create comfort with your team because it is a passive house for I think many in the building trades and definitely within a city government. You're setting out on a new frontier, and in terms of both the utilization of technology, in terms of the design. And then also with the, in terms of like the project manager in the case of a developer, it's a new space, I think, for a lot of folks. So trying to create comfort is one of the things that we've tried to do through our office in order to effectively kind of demystify a lot of the different tools and technologies that are available. So from a local government standpoint, we've tried to, work closely with folks, in civil society or nonprofit organizations to help provide that education. But also, I think one of the things that's been really important is having those first couple projects in the ground and working in operation, because then they become the demonstration that we can build on top of. One of the first major projects in Pittsburgh, actually to deploy passive house technologies, was a development that Action Housing, which is a local social service housing agency, constructed. And it was for a population that was moving from foster care or foster homes into kind of their first transitional house. And I always say that if we can build that for our most vulnerable populations, we can extend this across the marketplace. And it's really become kind of a good demonstration story for us to really build upon.
That's great. Thank you. And Garrett?
Well, for us, I mean, I guess the biggest fear was snowballing costs and the time it did take. I mean, I'm running a retail facility, and the building we left to move into this one with our Subaru store, this is double the size, almost triple, and we needed that capacity, so we needed to get going quickly. We knew that there was risk because we were trying to do something unique and marketable that isn't just your run-of-the-mill rooftop car dealership. So the fear, the fears maybe developers had weren't the same fears I had. But, now that we've done this, and I echo the sentiments from everybody else, it makes sense to do it again. I think we'd be able to do it much more quickly if we are given the chance to execute something very similar. So I think just from my standpoint, the fear was, how much more do I have to keep putting in to get this done? And what is it costing me over the time having to wait for this type of building to materialize and become useful to me? It was a bit frustrating, but I think the big thing now is just those fears are gone for the most part. I wouldn't have those doing this again. So.
Well, and you had some kind of unique challenges too. You had those big, as I recall the story, those big overhead doors that you had to figure out, which were critical to your service, but presented real passive house challenges. Yeah.
So we had to keep our shop efficient, you need to be able to have a workflow plan that allows people to get in and out quickly. That's your technicians, that's your, alignment guy, whatever it may be. We had to take a shop down from 4 doors to 2 doors. We had to take our customer reception area from 4 doors to 2 doors as well, which, just provided some hurdles that we had to overcome. But again, now that we're in here, I mean, you don't even really notice it anymore. We've readapted to compensate, and it seems to make sense. I don't know, if I had to do a project twice this size now too, how that change would work. But I guess that would be my only fear, is how scalable can I make this for my application? Right.
Interesting. Well, I think we have a lot of architects that would love to take that challenge with you. That's an interesting thought process. And then let's round it up with Alex, and any comments you have regarding to fears as you went into this really daunting Chelsea project.
We had 3 fears. Our first fear was when we learned about Passive House was the final air blower test. And so for us, we had this, we could go and spend all the money and all the time, and we could screw something up and you fail the test. And then what do? And of course, no one's heard that story from any other passive house builders before. So I think that for us, we hired an owner's rep to assist us, and they had passive house experience. And so they allayed a lot of our fears, just because you could tell they knew exactly what they were doing. And one of the things that they suggested was doing several unofficial, tests, blower tests, every 2 or 3 floors, so that after the first one, we worked out certain kinks, and then it just was pretty smoothly as we continued up the building. And the final test, we killed it. I mean, we almost doubled what our what the requirement was for passive house. So, there was really no fear there after we gained a comfort level. The second was the marginal cost increase. And again, it was our owner's rep that basically knew exactly what they were doing and how to kind of fast track certain things. And it just really, there of course are some small marginal increases with a passive house, but all in all, those, there were no crazy game-changing costs that would have affected our final financing or anything like that. And then the third, would the people recognize the benefits of passive house, and would they rent it from us? So we definitely tailored our marketing with our marketing and our leasing team that really focused on the health and the quiet benefits, rather than nerding out with all the science that people rent in New York City through emotion. It's very emotional. It's not because a number is better than another building's number. That is meaningless, and you might as well just go to sleep. So, for us, our marketing, that really helped us, and we leased insanely fast. So
yes. I'm hopeful that as we get the materials up and into the chat as this goes forward, that everyone will click on that and take a look at your marketing materials, because they're special. And interesting you bring up the cost issue, because Emma, I think I've seen in your materials you have a quote, something along the lines of, if you think it will cost more, it will. Right?
Absolutely. I mean, when we're looking at our new passive house projects, cost is obviously one of the most sensitive issues from a developer's perspective. We've been investing in passive house now for over a decade, so we don't really consider any other form of building delivery. And that's because passive house has proved itself to offer real value for money and to be really a sound investment proposition.
That's great. And if we can just transition with you into the next question, because it's also about money from the standpoint of financing. Now, as a city and city council, how did you think about that as you started to see traction even? How do you think about incentives or getting more people to come on board with seeing the potential in passive house?
Yeah, I mean, for us in the city of Pittsburgh, maybe just to frame this out real quickly, is that, our work is really rooted in the Pittsburgh Climate Action Plan. And one of our targets within our Climate Action Plan was the reduction of energy consumption by 50% by the year 2030. So with that in mind, we've had to work on different strategies in order to help achieve that. And specifically for municipal operations, one of the things that we recently passed was a net zero performance guideline for all of our municipal facilities. And, part of the reasoning for that was to improve the quality of the built environment experience for residents and employees of the city, but also for looking at reducing the long-term operations and maintenance costs of our facilities. And we found, just for kind of the reasons that were mentioned, the passive house delivery system is one of the best tools that we have as an owner operator of over 300 facilities to basically put that forward as part of our renovation and new construction cycle. So, some of the things that, we see now, you mentioned the Firehouse 8 project, is a lot of those types of challenges with garage doors and living quarters. So it's a multifunctional space that's probably close to 100 years old. So it's that renovation that oftentimes passive house is a challenge of. But one of the things that's guiding us, though, is that we use the analogy, we're not after the plaque, we're after the performance. So from a local government standpoint, we don't have an intent to have a building commissioned or, in the LEED space, like go out and get a LEED certification or any of that, because actually that money for us is better spent in the actual materials and labor to get the project to perform at a higher level. So those have been one of the driving costs for us as a team, but also when taking kind of ordinances like that and the technical aspects to city council, it's been an easy sell for them as well, and they've overwhelmingly supported it.
Now, do you feel that you have enough practitioners that you don't have to necessarily provide a lot of financial incentives to get these projects, built, or do you feel like there's still an alignment from a resources standpoint that the city has to kind of think about?
Yeah, that is one of the challenges and hurdles that we're actually that's my 4 o'clock conversation. It's timely. We can use any help that you guys can provide. Is really trying to find the financial tools to help align with the technical tools. So typically local governments have a conventional way of financing projects, whether it's through bond financing or tax revenue. But one of the things that we're trying to institute is a more performance-based contracting approach into kind of our procurement practices. And it's a bit of an uphill battle. So just like getting architects and designers to adopt Passive House, it's also getting kind of the finance and legal community to adopt new financial practices as well that glue well together with energy efficiency technologies.
Sure, that's great. And if I can flip over to Ed to kind of build on what you've said, Grant, in thinking about Vancouver and what Vancouver has done, Ed, and you've been very involved in, kind of pushing the envelope. As you think about Vancouver and their incentives and the carrots versus the sticks, right? The incentive of here, if you do this, we'll bring this as Vancouver, but if you don't, here's the stick. Has Vancouver found a way to kind of bring the carrots and the sticks to bring everybody to a higher level of understanding with Passive House?
Interesting question. When we started, there were no incentives, period. They evolved it to allow the only incentive they're really providing is that they'll offset the density of those thicker walls, so it doesn't affect your FSR ratios. That's really the only incentive. There's other incentives that for example, in our rental projects, we're doing 100% rental, then they'll offset some other financial components, but that's got nothing to do with the green building policies. So we took the lessons learned there. Our second project, we're building 52 townhomes. We go to the municipality and say, hey, do you want to do a pilot project? Let us show your community what this is all about. And these are market townhomes. And basically, we said the question, well, give us some financial support, cut us a check. They said no, but they'll give us extra density. So the leverage that somebody would have is to go to the municipality. Hey, allow us some extra density. We're providing these benefits to the society as a whole, right? In our market world of housing, that's basically what's available to us. And I'll add one more, just another comment. I'm going to roll back to fear. Bankers are fearful, so don't tell your bankers.
Oh, interesting. So kind of along the lines of Emma's fear, like if you don't know you can deliver it, don't tell anybody too early that you're going after it. So that's
You're really a building.
Let me transition to Emma then from the standpoint of the whole financing, because Passive House does represent some unique challenges, right? You have to spend a little bit more money up front. You have to be willing to invest in design to get the results longer term in operation. So, how did you think about that with Exeter City Council, and how willing were they to rethink kind of that model of cost shifting?
Again, I would say it was a bit of stealth in so much as where you maybe conceal costs. So I didn't really wave the flag in terms of the cost premium of Passive House on my first project, because 12 years ago that was 20%. I would say now, certainly when we're delivering higher density blocks of apartments, our build costs are more or less comparable with conventional UK building standard costs for construction. Now, we've been able to drive down the costs of construction because of our experience and the fact that we have got 6 generations of Passive House projects that we've done a lot of learning on. But you're right, some of the upfront costs are slightly higher. You often have got perhaps a larger team. If you haven't got a Passive House designer, you might have a Passive House consultant. But the great thing about Passive House is the payback is relatively quick. Now, it can either be a financial payback or, if it's a retained asset, there are other sort of below line benefits which are beyond financial. So, for example, we have a lot of social housing that is certified passive house, and we have found that over the last 12 years, our levels of rent arrears are negligible for our passive house homes compared to our non-passive house homes. We find that our residents don't move out, so there's far less churn. So we're not dealing with the costs associated with vacancies. And interestingly as well, and I think Alex might have touched upon this when he's marketing his open market properties, we've had far less antisocial behaviour. And we think that's probably linked into the fact that with the quality that comes with passive house, and particularly the acoustic benefits, we're certainly probably having less antisocial behaviour because of people being antagonised by, sound leakages from communal facilities, really. For us, what we found, the more we develop to the passive house standard, the more it becomes a kind of financial no-brainer. And particularly when you upscale, and if you take, for example, our leisure centre project, that's a £40 million project. I'm sorry, I don't know the US dollar equivalent in our current market. A massive investment by the City Council, but for a building that is so energy consuming, actually the business case wasn't so much to prove that it had to be passive house, it just wasn't viable not being passive house. So for us, increasingly, passive house is a sound investment decision. And we're also seeing this when we are selling passive house homes because they can command a premium because of all the unique features of the homes, way above just performance, but in terms of healthiness, climate resilience, and acoustic comfort. And that means that invariably a passive house project can be more profitable.
Mm-hmm. That's great. Thank you, Emma. Alex, from the standpoint of your project in Float Chelsea, did you have financing challenges, or were you able to fully disclose, or did you have to keep everything secret too?
One or two things I'd like to discuss here. One is specifically a New York issue. So, this is for the people that are listening that are in New York, because elsewhere I doubt that it would be the same problem. We're doing our project is 55 units, and of that 55, 17 were affordable in two different types of affordable categories. And the more long-term category is called inclusionary housing, and it's governed by a separate department in New York City called HPD. So HPD, and like many of the real estate or building organizations in New York City, they don't talk to each other. So HPD had no idea what a passive house was, and so they only care about affordable and free market. So when we had to explain to them what it was, they demanded that we get a bank to fund our project. So we were going to self-finance this. We were going to fund it ourselves out of cash. And now, because of their, I don't want to say ignorance, their lack of education about it, we had to go out and get a bank to finance it, and that cost us over $1 million in fees and just associated costs with the financing. So we were rather upset about that, because they should be bending over backwards to do a project like this. It should be a poster child for affordability, and instead it's costing us more. So that was the first issue. The second issue was, and by the way, our bankers knew enough about passive house where they were intrigued by it. They weren't turned off by it, but it turns out that their internal, development managers that would check our progress knew nothing about it. So that was also a problem. But on our takeout loan, our permanent, we are going to the agencies, Fannie Mae or Freddie Mac. We haven't locked it in yet, but they offer incentives both on pricing and on fast tracking, and a few other intangibles for both affordable and energy efficiency. So,
Did your bankers already know that about Freddie and Fannie, or did you have to discover that?
well, it was kind of a process. It was an ongoing process. So when we started looking into it 2 or 3 years ago about what kind of permanent we would get, there were no benefits. So those benefits from the agencies only came out, I would say, in the last year, year and a half. And it's ongoing. I think they're growing. The agencies are very hungry, and these are national, programs. They're very hungry to do energy efficiency.
Yeah, that's really interesting. Thank you for sharing that. I appreciate it. And then Garrett, from the standpoint of either financing, now you're probably in a unique situation as kind of the owner developer on your project, but in terms of financing that, did you find any benefits? Were you able to secure any advantages by pursuing this as Passive House? You were on your own.
Yeah, I have. There was no real support or anything like that given by our municipality, provincial government, federal governments. There's no programs for that in the application I used it for. And to maybe echo some of Ed's points as well, when I was shopping this, we did something similar to Alex, and I funded this out of cash flow during the majority of our build. And then the goal was always to put some sort of mortgage in place to, obviously to recoup some of our money. But, certain banks were asking me, well, separate out the portions that wouldn't be passive and what would it cost to build it otherwise, do this, do that. And I'm going, well, my roof costs this. I need a roof. I can't do it without a roof. It was just a bit of a nuisance more than anything, due to the fact that nobody really had a strong grasp of what we were actually building. And finally, we just sat down with a few banks, showed them, what we were up to, and just said, this is 4 walls and a roof. You finance luxury buildings all the time, but what's the difference here? So we ended up getting pretty typical mortgage terms. On my case, a little bit different. I'm a single-use facility. If a car dealer goes broke, there's likely very few alternatives that come into this facility and could take over right away. So I already have a couple of hurdles that a multi-family facility wouldn't have to deal with. But again, it was a nuisance. And when we went to the banks honestly and said, this is what we're building, look at how great this is, blah, 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 it was met with a lot of skepticism. Why would you spend so much extra on this? And I go, well, you'll finance a guy to put marble floors in the lobby of his hotel, but you won't finance me to build a building that's going to save me, upwards of 60% of my energy costs. That's ridiculous.
Right. And put people in a much healthier building at the same time.
Well, that is a huge difference. Where we have this building right now, I also operate the GM store, which is next door, and the Cadillac facility, which is one store over. The energy savings alone, the GM store is twice the square footage, but they pay 5 times in terms of the amount of energy consumed. And this is also coming from a spot in the world where I bet if we were to compare the price I pay for natural gas versus anybody else, being in Alberta, mine is as low as it possibly could be. So I think if I was building this somewhere else, those savings could be even bigger. Yeah. The other side of the thing, the Cadillac store is about half the size of this and actually still spends more in energy than this Subaru building does. So it's kind of a good test case right here. I mean, I've got it all in the same 3 blocks. So it's awesome that way. But
interesting. Well, I want to transition and go from design to construction, and start with you, Garrett, on as you thought about delivering through construction and into commissioning what you set out to do in design. How did you think about that? What was important in order to make sure that you reached those goals? How did you think about that? I mean, it's your place, it's your money. How did you take that on to make sure you were getting what you paid for?
Well, we started out knowing we were going to take some risk because we wanted to do something extremely unique. In the 15 years that I've been a part of the automotive world now, I've been a part of 4 different constructions of buildings. nobody really considers our energy consumption in an automotive retail standpoint. I mean, most of the dealerships you drive by, massively huge front windows, not a lot of insulation anywhere, built to display product and not really a lot else. So we set aside the goal to do something different, build ourselves a marketable advantage amongst our competitors. Subaru in our country is only about a 4% market share. So when we go to market, we want to be screaming something different. We want to be talking in a different language than all of the other competitors, just due to the fact that, listen, we're not getting the budgets that the big market share guys have. We're not, being able to capitalize on that kind of money. So having a unique proposition was huge for us. So once we started going through this commissioning, I had alluded to it earlier, we had to kind of gather up people from all over the country to make this happen. But the reason we settled on passive as well was we felt we'd have a world first when it came to an automotive retailer. So that was really cool. The whole process, I'll tell you, the big part is the early design. I mean, the design and the modeling and testing and understanding your environment took a huge amount of time. I can remember when we built our GM store in 2014, I think I sat with our architect like 4 times and then we had it and we were done. And with this passive house building, I think it took almost a year and a half before I even had a shovel going into the ground. So much different story. Milestone wise, it was hard to put dates on it. It really was, because I had no past knowledge to go off of. So we were just hoping to get it done in some reasonable period. We ran into a few environmental concerns. September, we expected to do all of our exterior insulation, but it rained the whole month. So it was really hard to get all that stuff up when it's supposed to be dry, and just certain setbacks. So now I don't know if I would say I had any expectations going into it from a timeline standpoint, but I certainly do if I'm to try and recreate this building somewhere else. And I think that's really all I'm hoping to get out of it. The next time I do this as well, whether it be a dealership model, I would like to build some kind of passive multifamily facility too and use it as a rental property. But I know what I'm going to be looking forward to. And when I see some of these weird things happening that typical buildings don't have on them, it's just part of the process and away I go. I don't know if that answers your question fully, but I don't know if I had any expectation really for timeline.
Well, I think, too, you've got some panelists here that would encourage you to do that multifamily project. I think that Passive House is a pretty good fit there. So,
yeah.
But let me switch over to Alex, because from that same standpoint of delivering, you talked earlier about the importance of training and the importance of testing. And so is there anything else that you wanted to add in terms of knowing that you're going to deliver on goals and really mitigating the risks associated with that whole construction process?
Right. So I would say that there were 2 or 3 additional points. One is the details in the plans. So Stosh, the architect, really provided details for the GC and the subs that would then be used to create the milestones and the tests, whether it was plumbing and sprinkler or HVAC, but in a normal project, I've never seen details like that. So additionally, our MEP, Stephen Winter and Associate, would also highlight those details in markups and take pictures of the way it was supposed to come out, so that at each point, someone had something visual to look at that they could go back and check and test, and along with the mock-up that we did a full room mock-up. It was probably 100 square feet that had doors and windows, so that these guys could go and look at it and practice putting it together, taking it apart, sealing it, and then also the tradesman classes. So this goes back to your very first question, which about team building, and I forgot to mention, but tradesman classes aren't required for Passive House, and going to the buy-in by the contractors and the team. I got that feeling. Emma said it's a gut feeling. If they didn't buy in from the initial conversation about quality and about the energy efficiency, they just never got on the job. So for us, that buy-in was important top down. So it started with the owners and started going to the foreman and then to the actual workers. And everyone along those lines took the tradesman classes. And so it really was easy to monitor.
When you think about delivering all the way through the process, do you have anything that additional that you've learned through your projects, Ed?
Pretty much iteration or reiteration of what Alex was just saying, that what we were doing was everybody that comes onto the job site gets a briefing, and we try and educate them on what they're doing here, right? In the totality, right? Because we found once somebody understands, how they fit into that whole picture, they're just more inclined to be aware and do a better job. So in British Columbia here, we have what's called British Columbia Institute of Technology. So there is a training program for workers, right? So you now can get a certificate for passive house building, right? And typically the framers, and envelope people will do that. But just, it all comes back to that attitude of whoever's designing your building. You want that all the way through to whoever's working on the building, right? I think that once they understand they're working on a bigger goal, it's a premium way of looking at, we're building a better building, right? So it's our job to make sure everybody understands that, right? From the top down, everybody through that chain needs to understand it and be keen to do it, right? Yeah.
For sure. And I feel like this is a great segue into asking each of you to, kind of opine on everything we've talked about and anything you think might still be out there on this notion of, executing passive house. And what advice do you have for owners? So your opposite number. Grant, your opposite number at another city, and Emma, your opposite number at another group trying to do the same thing you're doing. What is the advice you give them today? Recognizing that there's a whole lot more experience today than there was back when you all accomplished some of these firsts. And Emma, I'd love to start with you.
Just do it.
Just jump in.
Yeah, because what you're doing, and all of it, everyone's touched upon it today, is you're creating premium buildings, exemplar buildings that transform people's lives. And not just the residents or those people who are working or occupying those passive house spaces, but you're transforming the whole teams that deliver those projects. Because when you're building a quality building, actually all our professionals, all our contractors, subcontractors, that's all they ever yearn for. To produce buildings that they're proud of. And so what starts as a performance standard turns into something that transforms people's lives, and start those ripples. And, those ripples are rippling outwards. And the more that we can encourage other people just to try it, just do it, they will not go back to a different way of building.
Thank you. And Alex, so when you are talking with the residents of your building, Alex, how do you think about advice to your opposite number? In from the standpoint of, as Emma said, is it life transforming? Like, do you hear that feedback from the people in your building that, they're super excited to be there? I'd love to hear your thoughts on that, Alex.
Well, I do. I definitely have some information, some very interesting information about that. And it kind of was a little counterintuitive, but we own our building. We're long-term owners, so we're not looking to sell these buildings and flip them and move on to the next. We're long-term generational holders. So for us, we like to build things that have a quality. And for us, and being in New York City, especially in lower Manhattan, there's a lot of high-end and quality projects, and so it's very competitive. So knowing, going into that, knowing those things, we decided that we wanted to use high-end fixtures, condo-like fixtures, in our apartment build-outs. And so when we did the marketing of these things, we found, we wanted to emphasize passive house, but in an emotional sort of way, as I mentioned earlier. And we rented very fast. In about 4 or 5 weeks, we rented all of our apartments and only 4 using an outside broker. So when they saw it, they knew that they wanted it. But when we debriefed a lot of those tenants after they had moved in and spent a few days there, we learned some interesting information. No one, not one of the residents moved in because it was a passive house. Okay, so they rented it because of the high end fixtures and finishes, condo-like, very high end, and secondly because it was so damn quiet. So in New York City, you hear the noise, you hear your neighbors, you smell things, and you have none of that at Flow Chelsea. So and with what's been going on recently, we have some, I think it's a benefit for passive house users that have to work from home and that have health concerns. So it's just I'm sorry?
So they didn't buy for passive house, but they really bought for passive house.
They did, they just didn't know it. They just didn't know it. So emphasizing passive house today may not make sense. In a few years when it catches on, it will, but you really want to emphasize, I think, the health and the quiet. That's a good a good reason.
That's huge insight. Thank you for sharing that. Now we just have a few minutes left. So Grant, what would you advise your opposite number at a city looking to do what you're doing?
Yeah, I just, 2 quick things. I think one is that you have to set the standard, and then you have to build the capacity to deliver that standard. And that's kind of the approach that we're taking from a local government standpoint, both with our footprint, but also hoping to have that emanate out from just our facilities to all facilities across the city of Pittsburgh. But it also requires us to build the human capacity to deliver on those types of projects. So the technical skills on up and down kind of the human development chain that's required to bring a building to fruition.
That's great. Thank you. Ed, comments for your peers?
Yeah, I'm going to just pick up where Alex left off there as well. So we have 2 different types of buildings. One is a rental that we own as well. It's been up for 2 years. So we have seen a change, and we do market it as passive house. As you, Alex, we market the health, comfort, quiet. That's the primary issues. It turned out, people are aware of energy efficiency. That's not why they come or why they want to buy. It's that health and comfort and quietness. So we have seen people now coming as we have turnovers of tenants. We're seeing more and more, and again, not a great number, but I'm going to say it's maybe 20% now are coming because they want to come and look at it because it's passive house. We're also in the market right now marketing townhomes. They are passive house. And in spite of the pandemic closures and everything else we're experiencing, we're still selling pre-sale units of $1 million townhomes, right? And in that case, that's a key differentiator. Nobody else is doing that in this particular area of the city. That's drawing people, and people are interested in passive house. And I guess partly because of Greta Thunberg, the whole issue of greenhouse gas emissions. We designed this one as it's greenhouse gas free, right? There's no gas coming into that project, so it's becoming an issue.
Thank you.
Okay. Yep.
Thank you, Garrett. Any final thoughts for retail type folks?
For me, the big thing here is I'm focusing on trying to improve our efficiencies in every aspect of our business, whether that be our processes, whether that be the accessibility to our stores, whether that be our bricks and mortar. Well, to summarize this project here, after I built this, my appraisals with comparative type analysis for other dealers out there, I'm not spending more. I'm really building something that did take a little bit longer, yes, but I think I could dramatically improve next time. And now I'm just the guy here who has 1, marketable advantage, 2, cost savings advantage, and 3, I've got, from an employer standpoint, a quiet, well ventilated, ease of livability building that my competitors don't have. So I'm sitting here thinking, okay, it felt like I was spending a whole ton of a lot of money more, but my other question is, what are these other guys wasting their money on if they spent the same amount I did?
Yeah.
So,
yeah, no, that's great.
I guess that's where I'm at, and I think like Emma said, it's kind of no brainer for me now. Just, you know, even if you don't get the stamp, like Grant had mentioned, or the plaque, you're going to be making a building that should be long-term viable, but also that livability and that comfort level is just through the roof.
Yes, thank you. And thank you all very much for how you kind of wove together your experiences in a way that really now speaks to owners, developers, and city planners looking to figure out how to deliver Passive House. How do you execute Passive House? You all were brilliant. I kind of summarized a couple of key takeaways. And the first one is that to be first, you have to be relatively fearless. I heard all of you talk about, you know, really tamping down your fears and going into the unknown as pioneers did. Now there's more experience. And you also talked about finding analogies, that building owners should look for analogous situations, whether they're in their regions or outside their regions. Find those analogies. And that, again, you know, pioneering requires that we all teach and train. And we've all become educators in a certain way on Passive House. And for that, I thank you and appreciate all your efforts in driving this forward. And you've been absolutely terrific. So thank you for your time today.